Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Two things we talk about today. One, of course, the Pratap Bhanu Mehta Ashoka University episode, which is an ongoing story. And second, briefly, a reference to a speech that the Pakistani Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa has delivered today. It's quite interesting. So, first of all, Pratap Bhanu Mehta. Now, most of you know who he is. He is among India's foremost public intellectuals. He is also a full-time teacher. He is a former Vice Chancellor of Ashoka University. Before that, President of Center for Policy Research in Delhi, CPR, which is now headed by Yamini Iyer, whose articles you often see on the print as well. Pratap Bhanu Mehta also is a columnist, public speaker, and that is what makes him a very prominent public intellectual. So he's had this column in the Indian Express for many years. In fact, it was when I was editor at the Express that his column had moved there, if I remember correctly, from the Hindu. He was very young. Remember, even today, he's not 54 yet. So he's very young. He's achieved much of it at a very young age. That means he's been Vice Chancellor of the premier private sector university in India and also resigned from it 2 years back. So he is a prodigy in many ways. That besides his education and scholarship from the top Ivy League colleges. Now, Pratap over the years has turned out to be among our most perceptive but also among our most cutting columnists. In fact, he has such clarity of views. You agree with them, you don't agree with them, that's your choice. But he has such clarity that many of us professional commentators envy him. I envy him for something else also, which is the one thing that he has above people like us, which is scholarship. Because for us, it's now too late in life to start reading up all the texts and all the theory and all the history. So we will not get that scholarship ever. But we are journalists, so we have the privilege of reaching out to people like him and learning from them. So I have also occasionally called him, and when I need to brainstorm an idea or when I'm struggling for an idea for a column on Fridays, I would call him, and he's always generous, and he does it even to the youngest people that we know, because these reputations like these spread in no time, and those are then confirmed and affirmed again and again. So he has resigned from Ashoka University, as you know. He hasn't given a reason. Then some other stuff has come out whereby it's now evident that he resigned because under the circumstances, you know what that means, you can translate that into any language that is easier for you to understand. In this prevailing circumstances, it's best for me to resign, or it's best for him to resign. Immediately after that, in fact a day after that, Arvind Subramanian, the former Chief Economic Advisor to Government of India, himself an internationally noted, respected economist who was setting up a new center of economics education at Ashoka University, he also sent in his resignation, basically saying that if the university cannot protect academic freedom of speech, then what's the point of my being here? With that, there were protests by students. As I speak, there are protests by students. Also, students are now writing group mails to the trustees. Now, I also know that trustees have also got back to them. Trustees have got back to them by saying that, look, we have requested Pratap Bhanu Mehta to withdraw his resignation and he is considering it. If you ask me what's my view, I'd say that the university will be the poorer without Pratap, and Pratap also is needed at the university, but that's a view. Let me now move on to some more facts. Now, the fact is that Pratap's column has been, I don't want to say it's anti-Modi or anti-BJP or anti-Modi government. Pratap's column has always been questioning. So even when UPA was in power, in fact, I left the Indian Express in 2014, that's almost 7 years ago now. So when UPA was in power, a lot of Pratap's writings were deeply critical of the UPA government. That in spite of the fact that he was president of Center for Policy Research, and in spite of the fact that Dr. Manmohan Singh had also made him a convener member of the National Knowledge Commission, a very prestigious body. So usually you wouldn't expect someone of Pratap's stature to have a transactional relationship with the government, and certainly he is not one to do any such thing. So he didn't have it. He was very critical of the government and he wrote what he wanted. Sometimes he also disagreed with us editorially, the paper, and with me personally also in my views. For example, if you look at the nuclear deal, my view and the paper's view at that point was very different. We were supporting the deal. In fact, I often say that the nuclear deal was an intellectual argument that was run between the Hindu and the Indian Express, and the Indian Express won. But he had a different view, just like Arun Shourie had a different view, and he also wrote a series of articles for us disagreeing with us. So he was somebody who was always questioning the government. Now the difference is, one, a different kind of government came to power in India 2014. Second, this was a majority government, unlike the previous government. Third, that this was not a government which had brought along its own baraat of intellectuals. Because usually if you look at the American system, which is polarized, when one side comes to power, everybody who was in academia or in the intellectual system around that party or ideology then joins the government. When they go out of power, all these people go back into the academia. Look at the new CIA director. He was running a think tank, Carnegie, and now he's come back to be CIA director. Earlier he was in the State Department. So that doesn't happen in India because we haven't had many changes. So this government that came in did not bring many intellectuals of its own. So it had no baraat of intellectuals. It had a baraat, many baratis, but not confirmed, acknowledged intellectuals, barring a few. Those few it wraps with cotton wool and looks after them, but it didn't have more, and somehow there was a feeling of suspicion that all other intellectuals are quote unquote left liberals. It was a left liberal cabal. They helped each other, they reviewed each other's work, they looked after each other's scholars, and this was a sab mile hue hain system, and they were all generally inclined towards the Congress and the left liberal way of thinking. In fact, if you read Pratap's writings, you will see that that description does not fit him. He is a questioning public intellectual who comes at you with the force of his reading and scholarship. Once again, agree or don't agree. Often I have not agreed with him, but I have deemed it a privilege to publish him. Now, since this government came in, this government has also become less tolerant of criticism. So the third factor comes in now. Government is less tolerant of criticism. Government has a majority. This government does not have an intellectual environment or ecosystem surrounding it. It views the other ecosystem with suspicion. On top of it, you have a situation where you have India's first truly liberal private university. India is dotted with private universities, but those private universities, almost all of them are shops because they are generating money. They have good education, good faculty, very good campuses. I've gone to many of them. I go frequently to speak there. We've also held many of our events there, Democracy Wall that we used to have until last year and will revive once young people start coming to campuses. But I find that those are run like almost old-fashioned boarding schools or convents. I've even been to private universities where the chancellors or the owners, who very often happen to be big property magnates in the city, they happen to have a whole bunch of monitors of CCTV cameras so they can watch every corner of their campuses, particularly the entrances to the hostels on their campuses. These universities have uniforms, they have very tough attendance. These are run like factories. So this was the idea. Idealism with Ashoka was a liberal university. What is liberal? You will find Ivy League, Oxford, Cambridge, across the world. That's the reality. What is called liberal tends to be inclined towards what might be described as left. Now, young people do think like that. Then in the course of time, they grow up. After all, the CIA also goes for campus recruitments in America. So this is the general culture of liberal campuses. That's how this campus came up. Now a bunch of good people, none of them a big shot industrialists, but mostly self-made new entrepreneurs came together. They were 22 to begin with, then some more came in, it became 46, they raised 70 crores, then they took it up to 150 crores, then they set up a target of 500 crores, and then as they say, log milte gaye, karma badhta gaya, more and more people came in. If you check out the website of Ashoka University now, it has 154 founders, at least I made a physical count, and I am sharing a link with you, you can see it. Now if you see these 154 founders, there are people of various beliefs, various businesses, various age groups. They are not people, these are not like alumni of IIT batch number this getting together and giving this much money to set up a chair. These are business people, entrepreneurs, self-made people, professionals, also many corporates. Many corporates have also contributed money. So this became fully a privately funded university, which also has sizable fees. So it's not a cheap university, but also provides lots of scholarships. So the idea was to build this into a self-sustaining model. So if you look at these founders, you will also see that it's quite possible. In fact, you can be 100% certain that all of them do not vote on one side, on any particular side in our elections, because one side gets a lot of votes, chances are that a lot of the founders also vote on that side, and you know which side is that. So there, when you have a senior faculty member who's been vice chancellor, now the reason Pratap resigned as vice chancellor immediately after the second parliament election 2019 was also this, because his being vice chancellor and taking such a strong public position which drew a lot of fire at the university was seen to be trouble or seen to be onerous, because he was the vice chancellor, he was there in an executive authority. So he chose to make that sacrifice and stay on as a professor. But even now, because he writes so much and he speaks so much, and I am sure that these founders, when they go and meet people, they run into them, they have conversations, everybody gets taunted. The fact is that even when Pratap wrote for us, at more than one point, top people in the Congress might have said to me, they did, that why is he doing this, we've done so much for him. And I'd say, but you are not setting up a transaction with him. If you make him head of this commission or that commission, that's because you need the services of someone of his eminence and his scholarship. But governments don't think like that. So taunting goes on. So many of these people who've contributed, the founders, have their own businesses. They have much higher stakes elsewhere. Nobody wants to mess with a government like this if it gets angry, because it's got its agencies, and you could get tough questions asked or tough visits at sort of times that you might find them unwelcome. In a situation where you might find unwelcome, there is EDB, CBI, everybody. Also, the founders also have their own voting preferences. So they may have agreements, may have disagreements. So this is also a time in India where a lot of the prominent Indians, including self-made ones, are learning to live with a debate where people with strong views will be on the other side. People with strong and convincing views will be people you disagree with. So you have to give them space. Societies take a long time, modern societies also take a long time coming to accept that. So now look at America. Noam Chomsky, who might be one of the most convincing and strongest critics of the American system, American power, capitalism, he lives and thrives in the American academic intellectual system. So India is some distance from getting there. So I think these are the contradictions that have got into this situation. I've seen some writings, some anonymous writings, that this was to do with a plot. It was not to do with a plot, because I know that that plot had been acquired by the university almost 3.5 years ago. In fact, there was also discussions and debates as to what to do with the plot, and that is what I think some university spokesman has also told our reporter Kritika Sharma. You will see that story, I will share a link with you. So this is not to do with a plot, this is not to do with any FCRA, Foreign Contributions Regulation Act clearance. This is not to do with any distinguished university kind of tag. These are not founders who make compromises for material reasons, because these are not founders. If they were after plots of land, why would they put money into a university like this as donations and sizable amounts of money? So let's be fair to them also. So what's happened in this case is that I think this has caused a commotion. I am hoping that this will settle, but whether it does or not, we'll keep track of news. But I wanted you to understand this. I will also read out to you quickly the names of a bunch of founders. Not everybody, I told you there are 154 at least, and many of these are corporates, companies, trusts. But there is Anu Aga of Thermax in Pune. There is Dhruv Agrawala, Prop Tiger. There is Amit Agrawal, whose name you see on NASSCOM with Ruchira Jaitley. There is Sanjeev Agrawal of Million Ventures, Vishwavir Rahuja of Ratnakar Bank Limited, Ajay Behel, friend of mine, who runs AZB Partners, who's one of the partners in AZB Partners, Sameer Arora, the investor. So Pramod Bhasin is a serial entrepreneur investor. He's also our latest investor. He's the latest to join our group of distinguished investors on the print.in. There is Amit Chandra of Bain Capital. He used to be on the board of Tata Sons also until some time back. Sanjeev Bhikchandani, Naukri.com. There are Veer and Ravi Chopra. Veer Chopra is a scholar. He's also the brother of Vidhu Vinod Chopra, the filmmaker. Puneet Dalmia, industrialist. Gurcharan Das, formerly Procter & Gamble, now a public intellectual in his own right. Ramesh Tamani, investor. Ashish Dhawan, who is an investor and a philanthropist of incredible repute. Vikram Gandhi, again a philanthropist, former businessman, and investor Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, who is also a friend of mine. Hemendra Kothari, Gulpreet Kohli, Jerry Rao, whose byline you see often on the print.in, and many others. So together they have built a fantastic institution, because we also recruit young people from Ashoka University and they are first rate. So this is a good university. Building an institution, a new institution in such a short while is a big achievement, but to keep it going given the environment, and this is not just the environment today, it's also located in Haryana. Somebody would want their child or their grandchild to be admitted. Problems like that will also keep coming up all the time. That in spite of that, they've done a great job, and it's important that the university survives this little hump. And it is very important because in the wake of this, many other experiments have come in, some a little bit before this, some a little bit after this. So there is Christ University in Bangalore, Shiv Nadar University, Kriya University, which is now coming up. There is OP Jindal University, which is sort of across the highway, a little bit deeper on the same area of Sonipat. So all of these are looking at Ashoka, and all of them in some ways are competing with Ashoka, and Ashoka's success also is important for them. I might have forgotten Azim Premji University, so that is another one in the same sort of category. So we'll be covering this story closely, and as it develops, we'll keep you posted. Now this, finally, let me talk about Pakistan. Now, Pakistan government or the establishment has decided to hold what is called as Islamabad dialogues. You know, in India we have Raisina dialogues between Observer Research Foundation, MEA, etc. So this is not exactly that, but this is Islamabad dialogues or Islamabad security dialogues. What the government did just before that in Pakistan, that they networked about 100 odd think tanks in Pakistan and also universities with the Ministry of National Security. So somehow, I mean, it's a problematic thing. But then they decided to hold this big conference. At this conference, not every session is open, but some are open. So Imran Khan spoke there. But the important thing in Pakistan is when the army chief speaks. In fact, I saw this really corny tweet from a Pakistani writer and known Pakistani figure, Gul Bukhari, just yesterday with a picture of Imran Khan, the army chief Qamar Javed Bajwa, and Imran Khan's Begum Sahiba, and it had a corny caption, Father, Son and the Holy Ghost. You know, the father in that case, that's important to us. Father is the General Bajwa. So the daddy himself spoke today, and you should Listen to that speech. I will share a link with you. It's only a 13-minute speech, so short and sweet. He spoke today and he sounded very conciliatory on India. Now, every Pakistani army chief at some point has sounded conciliatory on India. This was given the timing, given the fact that right now his control of the government and the system is at its peak. Imran Khan is at his weakest at any point of time. Also, the fact that in the speech, while he mentioned Kashmir and the need for a settlement on Kashmir, he did not talk about what happened on August 5, 2019 in Kashmir. He did not talk about restoration of status quo ante to a situation before August 5. It did seem like that there was an acceptance of the status quo there or the fait accompli there. Then he threw in a bait. He said that if India-Pakistan relations improve, then India will get access to Central Asia, which means Indian goods traffic can drive from India through Pakistan into Afghanistan, into Central Asia, which is energy rich, which can be a big market for India, and also into Iran and maybe going on to Europe. But what we are not sure of is, when you hear this speech, is that is he making it conditional to the settlement of what he sees as the Kashmir issue, or is this an initiative? Is he saying that, look, let's move step by step and we can move in this direction? Because that is key. Any Pakistani army chief would have said, if you settle with us, which means settle Kashmir, do it my way, you can go to Afghanistan. Nobody would do that. So the indications are that this seems to be a more pragmatic approach, but it needs to be watched very carefully. Having said that, I will just mention one more thing as an aside. Some time back, I think about 3 weeks back, we had talked about Jat politics of North India. That was with reference to the farmers' protests and how BJP was getting concerned that it was losing its voters in the Jat belt in Haryana, Western UP, Rajasthan, and also in Punjab, although they were not really BJP's voters but Akali Dal's voters, BJP's partners' voters. And there we said that Jats, actually the same Jat second names are found among Muslims in Pakistan, Sikhs in Punjab, and Hindus in Haryana. And in fact, there was a picture that somebody used after that, because I mentioned that when Navjot Singh Sidhu hugged General Qamar Javed Bajwa, it was a Jat hugging a Jat. And some fellow, in trying to say that I was trying to run down the farmers' movement, said that maybe I was insinuating that there is a Pakistani connection to farm protests. For heaven's sake, no such thing. I was telling you about Jat kinship that spreads across many states and that spreads across religions. So surnames like Bajwa, Sidhu, Gill, Dhillon, you can find Chima, you can find them across these three faiths, because Jats are Jats. Now the interesting thing today is that Pakistan has just got itself a new air chief. The new air chief's name is Air Chief Marshal Zafar Ahmad Babar Sidhu. So he's a Sidhu. So in fact, if you were disturbed seeing, some people were disturbed seeing Navjot Singh Sidhu hugging General Bajwa, next time he could be hugging a Sidhu who's the new Pakistani air chief. And you know what? You could even have 3 Sidhus hugging. And who would be the third one? He'll be from India, and I know that most of you have not been able to guess yet. That will be Amrinder Singh, because he is a Sidhu as well. So once again, you understand kinship. This line on the map, Mr. Radcliffe only drew in 1947. Before that, we were one people, and there is a sense of kinship. Religion can divide a lot, but religion can't always obliterate all links of culture, ethnicity, language, and also clans.